I have seen over and over again students not just downplaying or ignoring or denying the reality of October 7th, they have been celebrating it. Now, among Jewish faculty and students, there is overwhelming support for the notion that this war is a terrible humanitarian thing to do, and overwhelming support that Israel shouldn't be doing this. The problem here is not that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are two different things. The problem is that a context has evolved on campuses where you can say any anti-Semitic thing you want as long as you say, I'm just being anti-Zionist.
So where are you on the protests? Obviously, you've always supported students' right to protest. Does that continue as things get more tense?
Well, the students do have a right to protest, and I certainly am baffled, both kind of on an ethical but also on a tactical level, by the decision of the president of Columbia University to use the police to disband the encampments on April 18th. And that was the spark that made this a major national issue. That was just an enormous tactical mistake. You just wait, you keep the dialogue going, graduation comes around, finals come around. Once she ratcheted up the tension here, we were going to always end up like this, and on American college campuses, and this is true at every school I've attended, and I'm not saying this is right, this is just the way it is. When you throw a rock through a window, your time on that campus and in that building is numbered. That's just the way it goes.
And you've written about what this will mean for the long-term political views of the students. Do you think there is this big political divide arising? We've been talking about culture wars quite a lot on the program the last couple of days, that you can criticize Israel with legitimacy, you can have a pro-Palestinian stance with legitimacy, and you can therefore have reasonable conversations about all sorts of things. But are we getting to a stage where these protests are avoiding that? They're going beyond that, and we're getting to two tribes that are actually saying things that are becoming unpalatable?
Well, I would point out that, university campuses are overwhelmingly liberal to progressive political spaces. So this is not the normal culture war where you have the right and the left in the United States or a similar country. The issue at a university like Columbia or Berkeley or UCLA is within the left. And it is the reality that Jewish students, who more than any other white group over the last, century in American politics, have always been, among white people, on the forefront of progressive movements. And I want to say this very clearly, because I have been part of progressive student politics, radical student politics, my whole life, until I became a professor, but I've always supported it. The Jewish blood was literally not dry on October 7th before Israel was accused of committing genocide. I have seen over and over again students not just downplaying or ignoring or denying the reality of October 7th, they have been celebrating it. Now, among Jewish faculty and students, there is overwhelming support for the notion that this war is a terrible humanitarian thing to do, and overwhelming support that Israel shouldn't be doing this. The problem here is not that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are two different things. The problem is that a context has evolved on campuses where you can say any anti-Semitic thing you want as long as you say, I'm just being anti-Zionist.
And what should we do about that? Because you've devoted your life to free speech. I very much believe in free speech. A student, celebrating October the 7th, what should happen? Because there's an interesting question there, that at what point does free speech stop? And you say, right, hang on a second, that's too much.
It's also a very difficult question, but I tell you what you don't do. You don't send police to violently break up nonviolent student protest. Right? That's what you don't do, because that only makes it worse for everybody, not least Jewish students. Part of the problem here is a bigger picture. If you want to address this problem, you have to take a step back. Because on university campuses, the question has long been, is something that is said making students uncomfortable? And while I might think of myself as a supporter of free speech, I've always believed that. I've always said, if you're saying something that makes a gay student, a black student, a trans student uncomfortable, it's not okay to say it. If you create a learning environment that stresses them out because the teacher is always making, kind of backhanded anti-gay, anti-black, whatever it is, comments, I don't think that's okay. The problem is that since October 7th, and really before then, a new criteria has emerged for Jewish students, which is, do you feel physically unsafe? And most of my Jewish students, and certainly, as a faculty member, I don't feel physically unsafe. I don't think that one of these protesters, many of whom I've had very good relationships with over the years, is going to, punch me in the face. Nor do most of my students, my Jewish students I'm talking about. But many of them feel uncomfortable. Many of them feel like the learning environment is more difficult for them because of this. And for other groups, that would be enough.
Yeah.
For Jewish groups, it isn't. And, it's not the worst thing in the world. Like, there are worse things going on in the world, including what's happening in Gaza. But the inconsistency here is striking.
And why does that?
And that's going to take a long time.
And why does that exist? Is it because there is this fundamentally racist view, really, that Jewish people are more successful in the material world as a culture, and therefore any protections that would be ordinarily accorded to minorities doesn't quite apply to them? And there's that sort of persistent background hum of that view.
That's part of it. I think it's not quite that simple. Anti-Semitism is really complicated. If you look at these right-wing, to use a technical term, morons in the House of Representatives, they have no idea what anti-Semitism is, but they're happily accusing everybody of it. And so when you hear Elsie Stefanik, Mike Johnson rabbiting on about anti-Semitism and not recognizing it within their own party, right? But at the same time, Donald Trump and his party have engaged in this right-wing anti-Semitism, have used right-wing anti-Semitic tropes, have celebrated people chanting things like "Jews will not replace us," and Gentile progressives haven't called them out. So what you're asking me is, what are the roots of anti-Semitism? That's a hard question. One thing I would point out is that anti-Semitism predates the founding of the State of Israel. It predates Zionist ideology. It even predates American party politics. So, but I will say that you're partially right. So there's a couple things on campuses that are going on. The racial frame for understanding politics is complicated for Jews, right? Many American Jews, people like me, look and present and are functionally white, right? My ancestors have been in Europe for centuries before they came to the United States. Many Israeli Jews are not. Many Israeli Jews are, from a racial perspective, Arab, right? But that's something that's not widely known. In addition, one thing I've tried to tell my peers who are not in academia but are my age cohort is that universities have become much less Jewish over the years. There's a smaller proportion of Jewish students. There's fewer Jewish faculty. They're just less Jewish spaces. This is a silly thing, but when I use a Yiddish word in class, when I started teaching 30 years ago, almost everyone understood it. Today, they don't. Now, doesn't mean anything, but it's a measure. So, and because Jews were always overrepresented, certainly in academia, as the face of white academia is disproportionately Jewish. So this all complicates things. And frankly, the Zionism is complicated, right? Israel is complicated. And too frequently, we try to find very simple ways to understand what is just not simple.
That's a very, very fair point. So what should happen then? You've written about this, but I'm interested in this. Students have a certain historical license to say stupid things, to work out who they are, to work out how the world works. And everyone has said something stupid when they're a student. It's part of actually the process of testing where you are and testing ideas. But you've got a bunch of people now screaming celebration of October 7th, filled with self-righteous anger that is also self-perpetuating because they're surrounded by their peers who egg them on, and then they probably say things further than they would have said by themselves, and all of a sudden they're saying things that are completely unacceptable. What happens? It's all on record, it's on social media. What happens in 10, 20 years? Do we hold that against them? Should this be a point where they say, well, if you do this, this may be something that follows you for the rest of your life?
And many of these same students have also taken a principled position that they believe is right, and in many respects they are. So I don't want to say these are all just raving anti-Semites saying, kill the Jews. That's not true, right? Many of them have a deep principled and I think appropriate uh, uh, repugnance at what they see going on in Gaza and the need that this bombing has to stop. And we might have disagreements on the logistics of that and the kind of politics of that, but there's nothing dishonorable in that. I don't know what happens. What I do know is that the hardest three words in the English language to say are I was wrong. So I don't think we're going to see these students. We're going to see more of what we're seeing now, which is the left in denial about. I mean, I know that my left-wing Gentile friends watching this will be furious at me for saying these things that everyone in the Jewish community virtually just accepts as axiomatic. I'm not in a hiring position really, but I have friends who are influential Jewish lawyers and who are partners in law firms. And I know that's a cultural stereotype, but go with me for a second. If you had a record of saying anti-gay things and were applying for a job where 20% of the employees were gay, you would be asked in the interview about that. What do we do about this? I don't know. But what I will tell you is that the administration at my university, at UCLA, and a number of other campuses around this country may not be aware yet, but they have lost. This movement is not going to go away. And to me, a major variable here is the state of Israel. Because if the state of Israel remains captured by extremists, by religious fanatics, by people who engage in genocidal rhetoric, even though I don't consider what's going on in Gaza genocide, I see the genocidal rhetoric. If that continues, I think more and more liberal and progressive Jews are going to walk away from Israel, particularly here in the United States, because this isn't about me anymore. I don't want this to be about me. The Netanyahu government has made me a target as a secular liberal American Jew. And if that happens, you will see the severing of ties. You will see support for Israel become a right-wing project rather than what it's been for a long time, which is an American project. And that would be devastating ultimately for the state of Israel.
Yeah, there's an awful lot to unpick with this. Lincoln, you've been very nuanced, very, very measured on this. Really interesting to talk to you. Thank you so much.